Forging cybersecurity experts. SecureNinja.
So good day everyone and welcome to SecureNinja's webinar on Red Team pen testing skills for the modern era. We're very pleased to have you with us today. So I'm Andrew Howard, I'm a lead instructor here at SecureNinja, and I'll introduce our guest, Dr. James Stanger, in just a moment. But first of all, I'd like to briefly speak about SecureNinja for those of you joining us who aren't familiar with our company. So SecureNinja is a leader in the IT industry and certification exam preparation and boot camps. We've been in business since 2004, and while we're based in Washington, DC, we have classrooms on both of the coasts of the USA, and we deliver all of our classes online as well. We'll also deliver private training boot camps to your organization on location anywhere in the world if you'd like as well. Now, we'd like to invite all of you watching this webinar to consider SecureNinja for your next training certification. And guess what? We're offering a 30% discount on any of our CompTIA training courses for the next 30 days. So all you have to do is mention this webinar, that you were on this webinar, when you're inquiring with the salespeople, and you'll immediately qualify for that 30% discount. And you can find all of our courses, of course, on SecureNinja.com. So let's get ready for the presentation. But do stay with this presentation until the very end, guys, please, because we will be giving away a free CompTIA exam voucher, the whole cost of the exam, to 2 attendees if you watch us live today. The voucher can be used as payment for any CompTIA exam. You can do it for Security Plus, CYSA Plus, CASP Plus, anything else in the CompTIA portfolio. Now, I'd like to introduce you to our very special guest. It's Dr. James Stanger. And if you've watched SecureNinjaTV, you'll see that we've interviewed him here before as well. James is CompTIA's Chief Technology Evangelist, and he's a recognized authority in security, education, information technology, analytics, and open source. He consults regularly with organizations such as the University of Cambridge, West Point, AstraZeneca, Target, the UK Office for Nuclear Regulation, DBS Bank, NIST, Northrop Grumman, and Dell.
Yeah.
Along with all that, he's also an award-winning author, a blogger, and an educator. His writings for Linux Magazine, O'Reilly Media, and McGraw-Hill have been translated in over a dozen languages. He's helped design global education, certification, and badging programs in topics as diverse as, and you're going to laugh when you hear this, guys, because I am laughing, as analytics, Linux administration, so far so good, kayaking, and would you believe it or not, British Romantic literature. That's a good one.
That's a good one, yeah.
James, welcome to SecureNinja, and the floor is yours right after I make you the presenter. So just give us a second here, and we'll have you on.
Yep, that makes it look a lot like a presenter. Thank you very much. How you been doing, everybody? It's good to be here. I'm James Stanger, as Andrew explained. I'm here to talk about pen testing. So let me see if I can share my screen. Until then, I'm curious, folks, to see where you're from. Tell me where you're from. I'm going to look into the chat window here, see if I can see it here. It should be for everyone. There we go. Tell me where you are calling in from or joining in from. I'm very curious. I live here in Seattle, Washington, so I'm going to share my screen, so forgive me if I am let's see, a bit distracted while I do that. I live in Seattle, Washington, really Olympia, Washington, but nobody knows where, Olympia, Washington is. So I just say I live in Seattle. So let me see, tell me if you can see my screen. Hopefully you can. I'm going to assume that you can. So if you can't see my screen, put it in the chat window, and then I will see if I can fix that. So let's go ahead. So today I'm going to talk today about pen testing, and this topic, I should say, is brought to you by Pen Test Plus. CompTIA has a whole cybersecurity pathway. Security Plus. In fact, Andrew and I were talking. He's teaching Security Plus this week. So for you Security Plus students, how you doing? It's good to have you here. Pen Test Plus is a great next step, right? So is Security Analyst Plus. You'll see what I'm talking about in here in a second. So I'm here to talk about security pen testing tools, but more importantly, the skills. And even more importantly than the skills of pen testing, I'm here to talk about why we do it in the first place. Now, take a look at that screen there. Hopefully you can see it. You're looking at the Tower of London, but also I think what behind it, is that the Shard, I think, and the Gherkin? No, that's the Gherkin. See that thing? It kind of looks like a pickle there, a modern building. I like this view because it shows the modern and the ancient, right? The Tower of London was first started, they started building that thing about 1066 AD, right? Probably about 1070 or so, and they've been adding on to it ever since. But around London, so you're looking at London there, they also have obviously modern buildings. Well, what does that have to do with pen testing? Well, first of all, look at that fortress, right? Imagine trying to pen test that. Right? See all those little, they look like crosses there? Those are viewpoints. Also places where you can shoot arrows out, okay? So you're looking at something that is a fairly impenetrable thing, right? Let's say, at least back then, it certainly was back in the day. But I like the idea of showing this picture because it shows the modern, it shows the ancient, right? And that's what you're going to be doing as a pen tester. You're going to be doing a lot of that sort of thing. So yes, I actually have created programs in British Romantic literature, but more relevantly, I've helped create programs in various things, from cloud technologies to pen testing, to security administration, a lot of Linux and open source. So that's what I do. Believe it or not, I like to get out and about. At least I used to. I used to do a lot of kayaking. I do a little bit still. Scuba diving, things like that. For those of you who don't know who CompTIA or what CompTIA is, we're an education company. We are a not-for-profit IT membership company. We have members of that are companies as large as Ricoh or Dell, as small as the little managed service provider down the road that might have 20 employees or 10 employees. We also have individual members. We do a tremendous amount of education. So if you've heard of A+, Network+, Security+, we do a tremendous amount of research, and I'm here to talk to you today about some of the research that we've done in regards to Pen Test Plus. So if you're curious about what CompTIA does, it's like, well, do they do education? Yeah. Do they do research? You bet. About the global trends that are going on throughout the IT industry. So today I'm here to talk about Pen Test Plus. I want to talk about today's attack surface, how we live in a cloud-first hybrid world, and then pen testing steps, okay? Because what I'm interested in doing is showing you how we need workers in various job roles when it comes to security. And when I say various job roles, pen testing is one of them. And you're going to see quite a few different job roles that you can be involved in. Okay, so on the next slide here, just a quick thing. This presentation is brought to you by CompTIA. Yeah, it's brought to you by James, but it's also brought to you by the CompTIA cybersecurity pathway. I'm a big believer in pathways, and I was really helped push CompTIA into pushing the idea of a security or even an IT pathway. Why? For decades, I talked to experienced IT professionals and also newbies. Both experienced folks and non-experienced folks were like, it's kind of hard for us to tell where to go next, where to start. It's the funniest thing, because technology moves so fast, because businesses move sometimes real fast, sometimes real slow, it's hard to know where to go next. So the idea of a pathway, and that's why you're looking at a picture there of some steps. That was up to a place called Ben Arthur in Scotland. It's a wonderful mountain to climb. More importantly, though, more relevantly, this is the cybersecurity career pathway, or I should say the CompTIA career pathway. Today, I'm mostly talking about the cybersecurity side, Security Plus, Pen Test Plus, CYSA Plus, but we have an entire career pathway for you. You join or you enter where it makes sense for you. Some people have to start at IT fundamentals. Some people already know their stuff and they get a bit of Linux, they get a bit of pen testing, and they're off to the races. But usually people start at, let's say, A+, Network Plus, to get the endpoints, the networking, the security. You get the idea, but we have a whole pathway for you. And that can result in all sorts of certifications and also designations that if you combine Security Plus and Cloud Plus, or Security Plus and Pen Test Plus, you can get the CNVP designation. All right, so let's talk about today's attack surface. That's a picture I took of boxing glove rock. Do you see how it kind of looks like a boxing glove? If you can see that, and hopefully you're seeing these slides. The reason I put that boxing glove rock, because it's the idea of defense, let's say, or even offense, right? Or even the idea of attack, I suppose. But let's talk about today's attack surface, because when it comes to pen testing, you know, it's like, well, how do you start talking about pen testing? Well, one of the ways that some people will talk, I'm not saying it's the best way, in fact, it's probably not. We'll talk about, well, there's the big four attacks that tend to happen in regards to IT today, okay? There's the big four, you can see them. The advanced persistent threat means that the attacker, you don't really know the attacker's there. They're working below the threshold. It's called advanced because they're using advanced techniques to avoid intrusion detection applications, to avoid monitoring, to avoid the firewall, or whatever monitoring might be in place. It used to be the advanced persistent threat was the property, as it were, or only really fancy nation states had the technology or the techniques to do an advanced persistent threat. And again, these are folks that don't announce their presence in any way. They could be lurking in your network for years, months, okay? Not just days or weeks, months and years. They're persistent because they keep hanging around, and they're doing all sorts of fun things. They're altering data, they're stealing data, right? They're generally getting intelligence so that they can take over your little company or maybe big companies' resources and then spread to other things. And by other things, to other departments in your organization, or maybe to partners. This is why the United States federal government is really big on pen testing, but also big on understanding advanced persistent threats, because let's say the Department of Defense contracts with a small company to provide a service. Most people know that a lot of times when the bad guys, whoever those bad guys are, whatever evil nation state you can think of, or whatever, you know, mafia group or whatever organized group or whatever, they'll oftentimes try to test or get into a small company and then spread into a big one. Okay, that happens a lot. I've even seen it the other way. They get into a big company and then they spread to a small company. All right, advanced persistent threat. They don't announce their presence. They try not to, but they're doing bad things all along. And I use this example. Imagine how bad it is to get ransomware. I think most of us know what ransomware is, right? It makes its presence known, right? Because you try to log into your computer and you get a lovely little message that says pay X dollars or X Bitcoin or whatever, and I'll give you your computer back. And you're lucky if you do get it back. Ransomware is obviously very obvious. APTs aren't, right? So there are a lot of issues involved here, but so supply chain attack's another one, and that has to do with the idea of infesting or attacking a certain element of your supply chain so that the rest of the organization is compromised. That's one way to look at a supply chain attack. Another way to look at it is you deny services to a particular element that's very important to a business, and then that business or government or whatever crashes to a halt. So supply chain attacks, a lot of ways, different ways to talk about them, but the whole idea is this. With SolarWinds a couple of years ago, you had a nation state threat actor basically poison a particular resource. That resource was then streamed through SolarWinds to dozens, thousands of hundreds of partners, right, who all were then basically compromised. All right, and those smaller partners, for example, the bad guys got in there and then spread to the next one. So advanced persistent threat, ransomware, supply chain, distributed denial of service attacks. There's one way of talking about pen testing. Well, you do pen testing to find the advanced persistent threat, right? To determine defenses. That's one way of looking at it. It's not the best way to look at it, though. By the way, if you're interested in knowing in detail what a DDoS attack is, we created a guide about what is a DDoS attack, how do they work. Happy to talk about that but you can go there. But here's another way to look at it. What is your attack surface? Okay, what are the crown jewels of your organization? Now we're getting a bit more into the reasons of why you even do a pen test attack in the first place. That's really important to understand, because you can stampede right into the tools or the techniques, but if you don't know why a pen test is happening in the first place, no one else does either, and you're kind of wasting your time. And I've seen that in the industry. I've worked as a pen tester. I've worked on the other side as a blue teamer, and I'll get into that in a second. But it's really common for people, well, we do pen testing for whatever reason. Sometimes businesses really don't know why they're doing it. Okay, so let me drill down a little bit more. We did a survey here, it was about a year ago, a little over, asking what are the growth areas, what are the technologies that will help you grow as a business? And we asked this of some small companies, a lot of small companies, but also a lot of real big ones. And notice what they have written here, what they entered. In other words, the key technologies that will help them grow their businesses will be Internet of Things stuff, IoT, right? You can see the bullet points here. Software as a service, right? That means the cloud, right? Platform as a service, SaaS. Robotics, drones, big data. Now I find this interesting because sure, those are growth drivers. Now you know what businesses are looking, how they're looking to grow. Almost half of them said these are the very important things. Well, that's great. Now you know what a trend is and when it comes to IT. But this is also part of the attack surface, isn't it? If companies plan to use these things like artificial intelligence or big data, right? Or data stores, things like S3 buckets in Amazon, or IoT, well, that probably means then that's where attackers will go, right? Because that's where they're going to go where the opportunities are. Now, I would argue, and I'm going to stick to this argument, attackers are definitely moved to the cloud, but they're going to focus on applications. And I'll get into that, what it means to pen test applications, because I'm not quite drilling down in there. But I want to give you some context. So instead of worrying about, let's say, going back here, you know, the big 4 attacks, and then we'll pen test around those, maybe we should be thinking about the attack surface of a particular company. And this is very important because one company's attack surface is different than another. A company that does insurance is different than one that does research. Okay, their attack surface is different than another company that would do manufacturing. Okay, what are the most important elements? And now you're starting to get into, well, there's a reason why we do pen testing. Moving on here, I also want to focus on the idea that when it comes to modern conditions, you could say, well, James, is the cloud all that modern? I mean, we've been talking about the cloud since the 90s, or certainly in a big way since 2005. It's now 2022, right? Trust me, that most organizations only the last 5 years or so have really started using the cloud in a big way. Okay, so it's still kind of a modern idea, right? We live in a cloud-first hybrid world. That's a fancy way of saying, well, sure, nowadays you're going to go to the cloud for your solutions more than ever before, right? But there's still a lot of data centers out there. There's still a lot of server rooms that organizations use. I was talking to a guy at AstraZeneca here fairly recently, I'd say about 2 months ago. And he was saying he has about, what, 12, 13 data centers that he works with, server rooms everywhere. And those are different things, right? The server room is somewhere on a floor somewhere in the building. A data center is down the road a piece, maybe in the same town or in a different city. The cloud is a very different animal than those two things. So we live in a hybrid world is all I'm trying to say as a pen tester then. As you go after, as you test, whether it be in terms of compliance or whether in terms of, well, we've got to improve the blue team or whatever, you're going to be pen testing the cloud. You're going to be pen testing data centers and server rooms, what's also called installed or enterprise stuff. Trust me, you're going to be dealing with all of these different elements. We've done some research. We do a lot of research, and we noticed that a lot of people, for example, have moved a lot of their email presence to the cloud, right? That's just really common, right? You move from the server room to Office 365, right? Get the idea. Same with the web presence. We're seeing a lot of business productivity software move to the cloud, but a lot of times there are decisions, not just in terms of cost or well, our folks aren't skilled at the cloud. That's not the reason. Sometimes it's faster and just more efficient to put a certain resource still in a server room or in the data center. So as a pen tester, you're going to be working with those 3 different environments. For example, you could be working with a data lake. That's a picture of a lake that I took, in the Lake District in England. You could be working with data lakes, for example, the data lakes and analytics on Amazon Web Services, for example, or Azure for that matter. You could be working with blockchain things. But the question is, are these resources, safe, or are they? That's a picture of Mount St. Helens that I was hiking on one day. Are they ready to explode on you? All right. So pen testers are there to help identify the attack surface. They're there to identify if there's something that may look like it's very safe in the cloud, but actually it's not. It's ready to, like a volcano, explode on you. There's my analogy. So question is, where do you start when it comes to security? Well, the answer being pen testing. And when it comes to pen testing, here are a lot of the elements that tend to be attacked. And I've got these almost in order, right? Today's attackers tend to focus on the applications. Why is that? Well, they don't have to necessarily worry about where the application is. Right, it could be running from a server somewhere, a Linux server or a Windows server somewhere in your back office, or it could be a serverless application. But applications are where the users are and where the data is. And so attackers want the data. They also want to manipulate users, either through social engineering or to get a hold of that account and manipulate it through man-in-the-middle attacks, for example, things like that. Virtual machines certainly are still being attacked. Virtual machine meaning you've gone up to Azure, you've launched a Linux system that's going to act as a server, right? So attackers go after that. But increasingly, we're seeing a lot of business solutions not even using a server. They'll just go after they'll use a serverless application. But we're seeing a lot of attacks on storage. There's the age-old example of the poor beleaguered systems administrator who creates an Amazon piece of storage, to handle all of the data that the organization will use. And then they create what's called an S3 bucket. That is a great storage bucket. And then they make it open to the world. That still can happen. But there are a lot of different ways in which storage can become really attacked very easily. Also, the management console, the identity access manager, is another area where attackers will go after. So rather than thinking in terms of these things, though, I've kind of got down into the weeds here. But what is the primary target today that attackers go after? These are good questions to ask as a pen tester. Because there are various pivot points. In other words, are attackers here to steal data, theft, right? Sure. Are they here to expose data? There's a real movement out there called doxing. Instead of ransomware, where they they take the data and they lock it away from you. I've seen attacks. I've talked to organizations who have been victims of this, where they go, where the bad guy goes, hey, I've got a hold of a bunch of information that's very personal. It's personally identifiable information of your customers, let's say. And unless you pay me, it's not that they've stolen that data necessarily. I should say that it's not that they've locked that data away from you. It's that they're basically threatening to expose that to the world. The point being that if this company happened to be in Europe, and they have to follow the GDPR regulation, and if a company that is GDPR compliant has an experience where data is exposed, they get huge fines. And these people were saying, well, look, we're going to dox you. In other words, we're going to reveal the docs that you have, the documents that you have, and that'll cost you hundreds of thousands of pounds. All you have to do is pay us 20,000 pounds and we won't do that. That's what I mean by exposure. Modification is a big problem. I was going to use this example earlier. What's worse, a NASDAQ or the Dow Jones Industrial or what have you, some sort of exchange being brought down for an hour or a day, that's terrible, or data being modified and nobody knows about it till it's too late, right? That way people can manipulate stocks. Which is worse? You tell me. I think manipulation can be worse. And also denial of access, like I mentioned. So how do we protect and automate these elements? And this is another area about pen testing that I'm getting to. And don't worry, I'll be getting into some attacks here in a second, or some tests here in a second. But here's the thing. Why do we do pen testing? And I think that one of the biggest reasons, two biggest reasons, is compliance and to improve security controls. So in other words, there are times when you have to show your compliance to a standard. PCI DSS, Google that. It has to do with, if you're a company that takes credit cards, you have to be PCI DSS compliant. Okay, so in other words, if MasterCard, Visa want to trust you, you have to prove that you're taking steps to improve or keep your security good. Pen testing is a major part of that. So to be compliant for those, you have to do a pen test every so often, and you have to do well with the pen test. That's compliance. The other element, though, is that if you have some area that you're really worried about getting doxed, exposed data, or you're worried about data being modified, that's a crown jewel. Now you can say, well, we need to improve the security controls in our monitoring over there. That means that you need to improve the blue team side of it, to listen better, to monitor for attacks. Well, how do you do that? Well, you send in the pen testers to go in and create noise, to attack those systems, and then the listeners go, wow, I wasn't listening for that before. You see what I mean? This is why you do pen testing, to improve the blue team, or for compliance. There are a lot of reasons for it. So let me go into this a bit deeper. You're looking as a pen tester, in many cases, for what I call an interstis. It's a fancy word for saying in the middle of things, okay? In other words, where a web server talks to a SQL server, okay? Where a web server talks to a database, or where a human being is interacting with email, some element of technology, with a mobile phone, or with Twitter or whatever, right? There is some sort of space in between there. Hackers love to manipulate that. When it comes to a web server and a SQL server talking to each other, we're talking about SQL injection attacks, for example, all right? When it comes to the human element, we're talking about social engineering. Application programming interfaces. Remember earlier I mentioned applications, that as a pen tester, you'll be working a lot in applications. Well, you'll be working with application programming interfaces and with applications themselves to see if there are any misconfigurations. So there are a lot of different elements that you're going to be looking at. That means you have to learn how applications talk. If you're in Security Plus right now, or in any other good security training program, you're going to be learning about how for example, TCP handshake is manipulated, right? There's your SYN, your SYN-ACK, and your ACK. Well, a man-in-the-middle attack takes advantage of that dialogue, right? So, by the way, so do DDoS attacks. You're going to have to learn about how HTTP and HTTPS work. This is the HTTP dialogue. This is manipulated by hackers all the time. If you don't know how that works, how set cookies work and everything, then you're not going to be able to drill into the details of what a pen tester does in terms of stealing session cookies, right? Or manipulating them and things like that. Many attackers and many pen testers will do a lot of work in manipulating encryption. This here is the 8, or some people call it a 9-step, the 9 steps that it takes to get transport layer security going, or what we often call SSL. So see that number 6, the change cipher spec and the change, those two elements, 6 and 8. That is often where attackers, pen testers, will try to talk down the TLS level or the SSL level sometimes into an area that can be manipulated. There are superseded versions of TLS that can be trivially hacked, all right? I'm just saying that as a pen tester, these are elements that are often manipulated. This way you understand the client and the server side of things. And it doesn't matter if it's happening on an old-fashioned server somewhere or in the cloud. It doesn't matter. These applications still talk the same. So if you want to use something called Burp Suite, that's a fancy pen testing tool that allows you to listen in and even manipulate connections, okay, application connections. You have to know the language that you're listening in on. And I'm not necessarily talking about Python as a language or JavaScript or C or whatever. I'm talking about the protocols being used. You have to understand that. So in order to use a tool like Burp Suite or so many of the other tools that are out there, you got to know first about the language that's going on. You have to know your application programming interface issues. And a lot of times, and this here is a kind of an abstract example you're looking down below about how an endpoint talks to the cloud, right? Application programming interfaces are basically like a menu at a restaurant, or even a server at a restaurant. Think of it this way, right? If you go to some sort of fast food joint and you order a hamburger, right? You as a client probably don't know how to cook that hamburger or even how the ordering process works. But the person taking your order, this lady here who's taking my order, she knows how to do that, right? She's like the application programming interface. So that's, she accepts the request. She turns around and says, hey, go get this guy what he asked for, and then the transaction happens. The reason I bring this up, as a pen tester, you'll look at various issues when it comes to APIs. And there's so many of them. There are a lot of botnets out there that can impersonate requests very convincingly. So it looks like it's James making the request, but it's actually Mrs. Bad Guy. All right. There's also insufficient authentication. There are misconfiguration issues. As a pen tester, you'll go and look for that sort of thing. Well, so I've gotten into the weeds here, but I did want to talk about as you're looking at, say, a compliance audit, or as you're looking for some sort of pen test audit to improve the blue team or the security controls that a company is using, let's get into some root causes and pivot points here. That's a picture in Japan. I took that picture. I just loved all those roots there. I couldn't help but think of the idea of a root cause analysis. As a pen tester, you're going to follow some version of the hacker lifecycle. There are a lot of them out there. There's the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which you're looking at. See each of those steps from reconnaissance to weaponization to delivery. These are the steps that has been analyzed, and this model's been out there for years. It's a very good one. Some people will use the MITRE ATT&CK model, which is very similar. So notice this. The cyber kill chain, the Lockheed Martin, starts with reconnaissance. Well, if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK chain, it talks about initial reconnaissance. And then it says, well, you move to the initial compromise. You establish a foothold. And then there's kind of a circular process where you'll escalate privileges and then do a bit of recon. And you'll maintain your presence, meaning if you've gotten in on a buffer overflow, well, maybe using that buffer overflow, you can create an account so that next time if somebody fixes that buffer overflow or whatever, you can just log in using what is considered a legitimate account. So then you use that legitimate account for lateral movement to go from one computer to another or from one company to another. Or you escalate, meaning you turn that account of yours into an administrative account, things like that. And you complete your mission, right? These are various models that are out there. You're looking here at the diamond model, which a lot of times is used in artificial intelligence to kind of map the infrastructure of a victim, right? What's going on there, and then the capability of the adversary to destroy or to manipulate that. It's all about tactics, techniques, and procedures. So what are those that you can use as a pen tester, all right? Well, here is some example, and now is where I'm getting into what a pen tester does. So you obtained information. That's the discovery or the reconnaissance process, right? And so how do you go about doing that? I'll explain here in just a second as I move on. But think about, then after you do your discovery or your reconnaissance, where you basically look at the person or the thing or whatever that you're going to attack, you have to really get into detail about how that application is talking, like I was talking about earlier. TCP handshake, stuff like that. Well, then you formulate your attack, right? You generate the indicators of attack or not, okay? Or indicators of compromise. An indicator of compromise, folks, is simply this. You as a detective, you say, well, it looks like an attack happened. Did it lead to a compromise? Well, here are the indicators of attack. Well, there was a scan that happened, if you call that an attack. Then it looks like somebody came in on a buffer overflow or manipulated a legitimate conversation between an application and a user and was able to insert themselves in there and do a man-in-the-middle attack or something like that. So, but you generate various attacks, and as a pen tester, of course, you try to act as stealthily as possible, right? That's what I mean by or not, right? If you don't generate an indicator, that's great because that way intrusion detection can't find you, right? But anyway, as a pen tester, you then document the attack because remember, pen testers are not really true attackers, okay, right? A pen tester is following a statement of work. They're following a contract. There are rules here, right? So they document recommendations and then they recommend mitigations. That says recommend. They're supposed to be recommend mitigations. That's what a pen tester does. So there's the step, right? But as you go along as a pen tester, you'll often pivot. Pivoting meaning that as you get information about the reconnaissance that you do, or as you get information during an attack, you'll go, I've got an idea here about how I can move very stealthily, or I have an idea to do something to act a little bit asynchronously, all right? So the hacker life cycle and the pen testing life cycle are related, but they are different. Okay, they're two different things. So on the left here, they got the reconnaissance weaponization. There's that's the attacker. But on the right, in the red there, that's the red teamer. That's the blue. That's the pen tester. So they plan and they scope first. Okay, they gather information. Well, that's similar to, right, reconnaissance, isn't it? And then as a pen tester, you'll do attacking and exploits. Well, that's very similar to weaponizing something. In other words, as you do research and you say, oh, there's a weakness there, is there some sort of tool here that I can map to that particular vulnerability? Now you're talking about weaponization. Delivery, right? That's part of the attack. Exploitation, meaning you've delivered the attack. Now, can you actually exploit that resource? Can you turn off that server for a DDoS attack? That's an example. That's not a great example. But can you manipulate that server so it has a new user so that you can get in later on? That's a good example. Can you install additional functionality or create user accounts, etc.? So that's all about the exploits. So what I'm doing is I'm mapping what the pen tester does to what an attacker does. Command and control, right, where you gain access, right, and you can actually control the systems that you have. But then when a pen tester will do all these things, but more, right, because they do that reporting. They communicate back to the blue team. They communicate back to an executive team saying, here's what we found, here's how you can fix it. So it's really important to understand that the hacker life cycle and the pen tester life cycles are obviously related. But as a pen tester, you're doing things legally. And as a pen tester, you have a written contract. That way you don't go to jail, okay, or get fired or something like that. So get a little bit more into the weeds here. So step 0, reconnaissance. Well, what do you use there? Well, there's so many tools you can use. You can use active or passive tools, and I'll show you that here in a second. Active tools, usually things like Nmap, right? As a pen tester, Nmap is still used, and you better know it cold. Okay, when I say know it cold, I mean you got to know how it's used in a very fancy way. You can't just do this script kiddie, Nmap space and then whatever resource you want to scan, right? You have to do it in a much more sophisticated way. A couple of reasons for that. One, you won't get as much information out of the scan. Two, it's really obvious, and you might trip a lot of alarms that kind of let people know, hey, there seems to be somebody lurking around doing something. So, but Nmap is still a very useful tool if used correctly. You'll also use discovery tools like Shodan, and I'll explain that in a moment. But that's kind of the, people will call it the Google for IoT, or some people will call Shodan the Google for hackers, right? We've all gone to Google or Bing or whatever. Well, imagine a website, and I'll show it to you in a second. Imagine a website that has gone out and crawled and done a lot of research, and basically discovers all of the systems that have been attacked, or at least have vulnerabilities. With Shodan, you can go take a look at webcams that still have default passwords, routers that still have default passwords, etc. Census is an example of that. Multigo goes deeper into that, but that's the reconnaissance phase. So then you decide, well, I've done enough research using, let's say, Nmap and Shodan on a resource to where there's a buffer overflow. Clearly, that's there. Well, now can I exploit it? Can I, create code or grab some code to do this? That's what pen testers do. And by the way, this is all done on contract. If you get inspired that you want to become a pen tester and then you start scanning other people's systems without permission, you can go to jail for that. You realize that, right? You can lose your job for that, right? There's a difference between a pen tester and a hacker, right? The difference is jail time. But the big difference is that a pen tester has permission from the resource, the people who own the resources, to actually do these tests. So if you're just doing them willy-nilly, don't do that. All right. So step 0, reconnaissance. Step 1, exploitation. Step 2, where you actually go in, and you could use a custom tool. You could use Kali's application that's often on Kali Linux. That's one of the poster children, kind of an obvious one, but it's a place to start. A Metasploit is a tool that can be used, and you'll see a screenshot shortly of that. Then you take actions on objectives and you upgrade. Okay, so I've already mentioned this, but I just want to give some examples. So in this case, I'm using the Shodan tool where I've used a particular login, and I've logged in, and I can now conduct scans of various systems. And in doing this, I was able to identify that a system had a very old problem that's been around for years. It's called Eternal Blue. And this next screenshot you're seeing where I am using something called MSF Venom, or it's part of Metasploit, to actually exploit a particular vulnerability. And I'm logging into that remote system. And with that, I was able to run an exploit, and I was able to look at, I was able to get a hold of all sorts of fun things. I got administrative passwords. I was able to create new users, etc. So let's talk about why and why we do this. So why pen test? I've already talked about this, but I think it's really important to emphasize it. Sorry, there we go. First of all, it has to mean something. The main thing I think pen testing is there for is to improve the blue team, the people who listen. There's governance and compliance. It's really important to understand why that's important. And since 2010, since 2015, since 2020, the IT industry, the security industry has realized that it's very important to kind of separate these concerns so that you basically have people who provide the infrastructure. Look under the 2020 here. I got to go quicker here. There's the infrastructure to think about. Then there's the cybersecurity operations people. They make sure the infrastructure is secure. But there's also the cybersecurity management piece here, the compliance piece. And that's where red teaming and blue teaming comes in. So I've already mentioned this, and it really comes down to how well the pen tester is able to work with the security analyst. They work as a nucleus and as a team. There are elements of pen testing. First of all, there's the pen tester, very narrowly defined, who targets a specific weakness. I found a buffer overflow in Apache server, and that's what I'm going to hit every time. Red teamers, much more broad, right? Still very effective, right? Their idea is that they will look at the entire enterprise and they will follow some sort of kill chain or some sort of methodology with their TTPs, with their tactics, techniques, and procedures. There's also the vulnerability analyst who uses applications like Nessus or OpenVAS. So those are elements of security auditing. So when you hear the term pen test or pen test plus will focus on red teaming, on pen testing, and vulnerability analytics. It does all three of those, okay? So here are the various here's a mapping of the tools that are often used. So in discovery, I already mentioned Shodan, but Whois is a great way to start, okay? The reason I say this is because Whois, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, doing a Whois search, do a Whois search on the domain that you've been approved of to scan. Why start with Nmap when Whois can give you plenty of information? And then you can use applications like Shodan and Nmap and Metagoofile. Then your pen testing, your actual penetrating, yeah, you can use, a PowerShell command maybe, right? Or Metasploit. One time I was getting ready to use Metasploit, and a person said, James, why are you using Metasploit here? And I said, well, it's got a really good tool that allows me to attack that Windows system, to exploit the Windows share that was kind of open, that was not properly secured. And she goes, well, James, that's fine, but why would you use Metasploit, and spend all that time on there when all you have to do is use the net use command on PowerShell, right? And that's when I realized, wow, you don't have to use, fancy hacker tools. You can use, it's called living off the land, right? So there are a lot of tools available. So you can see the activity in green on that screen, each of the steps, and then the various tools that can be used. So I'm happy to share this slide with you, this slide deck, so you can take a look at it later. But again, there's the fully informed stance when it comes to pen testing, meaning sometimes a pen tester goes in totally cold. He or she doesn't have any information about the systems. But I've participated in pen tests where they say, look, we're going to tell you everything that we have. You don't have to discover from ground zero. We'll give you everything. And then there are reasons why you do a fully informed or partially informed or uninformed. Fully informed often is because you're there to improve the blue team. Partially informed is about compliance a lot of times. And uninformed is where you're creating some sort of baseline for the blue team. So there are a lot of reasons why you would do that sort of thing. So let's see here. When it comes to vulnerability, VAPT, meaning vulnerability assessment and pen testing, they tend to be seen together. So you're working with threat intelligence, whether it be through Shodan or through some sort of information sharing organization like what CompTIA has. You're working with information from the blue team possibly to combine information so that you can pivot as intelligently as possible. So when it comes to starting the pen test, the first step, believe it or not, is not necessarily reconnaissance. Sometimes the first steps is meetings where you look with, talk to stakeholders. I've been involved in pen tests where the only person I really talked to was a member of the IT department. And the IT department, he said, this is kind of what we're looking to do. Here's the statement of work. Here's the contract you have to sign to, that you're not a hacker, you're a pen tester. Sometimes I've actually worked with boards of directors. I've worked with CEOs before, owners in small companies. Stakeholders, right, is what I'm trying to get at. Some of these stakeholders are very technical. A lot of them not so much, okay? So as a pen tester, you have to be able to explain certain concepts in very non-technical ways and things like that. So meetings, there are various meetings, and there's documentation you'll read. Sometimes pen testing, you could argue would be maybe a little tedious because you have to go through very detailed documents before you can then move on to do quote unquote the fun stuff. Well, the next step is part of that discovery intelligence, and sometimes people will call this OSINT, open source intelligence, right? OSINT, OSINT. I was talking recently to a person who works for the United States Army, and he's an OSINT specialist. He couldn't tell me a lot of the stuff that he was doing, but we were basically talking about a lot of these different types of tools. And first thing to understand when it comes to OSINT and pen testing, active and passive reconnaissance, okay? So active reconnaissance, Nmap is active. If I use Nmap, usually when I'm scanning your systems, that's active. I'm going out there and using the TCP handshake or using UDP or something, ICMP, and I'm actually contacting your resources. Well, that can be very beneficial. It can give me very current information. It shows in the moment behaviors. But the downside being, it can be detected, okay? All of these, Rust scan, people say, oh, don't use Nmap anymore, use Rust scan, whatever. I use both. Nikto is another tool. So that's active because you're actively doing that. Well, because you're actually going out there and touching that resource in a logical way, as it were. Well, then there's passive reconnaissance. I mentioned Shodan before, right? Well, think of it this way. Shodan, like Google, they go out there and they scan all of those systems for me, right? So when I conduct a Shodan search and get usually very current information, right? Shodan isn't going out there and conducting those scans for me, right there in the time. They did it an hour ago or a day ago, right? So even though it might not be quite as current, it still usually is very, very useful. It's still current enough. But here's the thing. Nobody knows I've conducted that scan except for Shodan, and they're not going to share those reports with anybody. See, it's passive scanning. So you're getting information, and the intended target has no idea that you're getting that information, okay? So you can also get good contextualized information. Here's an example of starting with good old OSINT early on. This is where I scanned. Well, I didn't scan. I used Whois, and I looked up StangerNet.com. I own that, so I'm able to do that without getting in trouble, right? I don't think I'll throw myself in jail anytime soon. But look at the information that I was able to get. These days, Whois results have been sanitized a lot. Okay, back in the day, boy, it would give my phone number and where I lived and things like that, but they've sanitized those a lot. But you can still learn a lot from Whois. This is what I mean by intelligence. First of all, now they know my, anybody who does a Whois scan, they know my ISP, GoDaddy, very well-known ISP. But if there's some sort of issue that GoDaddy might have that could lead to an advanced persistent threat or to an attack or whatever, that's intelligence that a good pen tester can go, well, okay, I've got some ideas here. They also know how long ago I created that domain. That can help explain, well, what kind of attack surface does James have? Well, might be newer stuff, okay? Looks like he's using an ISP, using a cloud provider, relatively new technology. Here's the domain name information. There's some information there that is kind of useful. Notice at the very bottom where it says website title none is given. That might mean that I have some default settings that could be exploited. Here's something. In this case, I used another resource for a Whois investigation, a query. That person knows that I have registered in Washington in the United States. Well, that could help with social engineering. Now this person knows where I live. Okay, so you can still get useful information when it comes to information. For example, I'm not using any form of DNS security. Okay, so maybe I am susceptible to some DNS-based attacks because I don't have encryption going there, right? By default, anyway. It knows I'm using VeriSign, for example. It's unlikely, but it happens. VeriSign every once in a while Here's one thing I could do as social engineering. I could use VeriSign to create a strangernet.com, right, domain, and use a VeriSign account. That might be, I could use that as a pen tester to trick people into revealing information. This is what I mean by OSINT. Metagoofile is not really passive, because what it does is it's an application that you use, and here's the command line for it. It's called Metagoofile, where you can target a company and download all of the documents that are on a web server. In this case, I told it to go out and get Microsoft documents and PDFs. And I was able to do some research, and I was able to look at the results, and I could actually find out on this company what version of Word they were using. Why is that a big deal? Well, there have been cases where versions of Microsoft Word had buffer overflows and other issues where you could go in and exploit that information. So this reconnaissance side of things is very important. It's the foundation for understanding what you can do next when it comes to attacks. In this case, I'm doing an Nmap scan that is telling me very slowly, right, so that intrusion detection systems won't find it, very slowly about the types of information, the type of server that's going on here. You can use all sorts of scripts to basically enumerate how encryption is being used. In this case, I'm using encryption to scan a particular resource, and it's telling me exactly which transport layer security ciphers are being used. So in Security Plus, for example, when you learn about ciphers and things, you're probably thinking, well, why would I need to learn that? Well, some of those can be manipulated more easily than others. So, but you won't know what to manipulate unless you know exactly what form of TLS is being used or SSL is being used. So there are various ways in which you can go into understanding more and more about how attacks, reconnaissance works. Multigo is really cool because you can, I typed in, let's see, my Twitter account, right? Just twitter.com/James Stanger. And Multigo went out there and did a really fun little mapping about all the people that I've been talking to via Twitter. This could be very useful information for social engineering, very useful information about what business relations I have to learn more context. Because it's all about mapping an area. This here is an area called the Quiring in Scotland that I was able to hike. But first I looked at a map. Same thing with pen testing. You basically find, and here is an example of Shodan, where I just decided to look up a specific IoT port. And this is basically Siemens equipment. These tools that I looked up, these things that I was looking up, these are basically power generating systems that have some security issues. Shodan was able to show me that very quickly. If I was doing a pen test of those things, that's very useful information. You can even create a Shodan account and use Shodan as a command line tool. You can also use it in conjunction with Nmap, for example. If you don't want to use Census, there's, Shodan, there's Census and others. So today I promised to talk about, why pen testing works, pen testing in the modern environment. My point, and I specifically promised to talk about OSINT tools. So there are so many of them out there. There's ZoomEye, there's Census, there's Shodan, of course, Nmap, and you can even use Nmap and Shodan together, or Shodan and other tools together to basically create very, very sophisticated active and passive scans to learn about information. In this case, I found out that there was a system using Oracle VirtualBox at a certain patch level, and that was something that was more exploitable, okay? So this is where you see the foundation of pen testing. And you'll learn about these sorts of things as a pen tester in things like Pen Test Plus, for example. And you'll learn about not just the script kiddie approach, but also what it means to do more sophisticated approaches. Because trust me, there are so many different controls out there nowadays that basically will automatically block certain scans and things that were the more obvious ones of 2 years ago or 5 years ago. But you'll learn much more sophisticated kinds of approaches. So I'm going to stop at this point, stop sharing. Let me see here if I can do that here. I'm going to not share my screen anymore. There we go. Yeah, all right, good. I should not be sharing anymore. And I can stop and answer any questions if people have them or what have you, because we've got about 5 minutes left. And I want to see, we can talk about additional elements having to do with DDoS if you want, or any questions that you might have about the activity of pen testing.
So can you see the questions, James?
No, I'm not seeing them, strangely. I don't know why.
I've got them for you. Let me be of some service to you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone for asking the questions. We have a question from Gloria. Gloria asks, we have been tasked with moving away from Burp Suite. Any alternative suggestions?
OWASP makes a pretty good one. Also, OWASP Zap, I find, can work really well if you can't use Burp Suite anymore. Another tool, suddenly it leaves me, not Burp Suite, what's the other one? I'll think of it in a second. But I'll take a look at OWASP Zap. It does a nice job of doing similar things as Burp Suite. I'm curious why Burp Suite you're moving away from it. Is it that you're using a for a fee, the more expensive version, because you can use the open source one? But OWASP Zap could work really well. And there's another one here I'll think of it in a minute. Beef, the Beef browser. You can take a look at that. BEF, right? That might be something that could use. That'd be a good alternative.
Excellent. Thanks very much, James. I have a question from Devesh. Hey, everyone. James, I had a question for you. What is your outlook on automated versus manual information gathering? I tend to mix and match as both have their benefits. Automated for time, I manually for granularity. But I'm wondering, when you scale your pen test scans to thousands of devices, if automated scans and tools like AutoRecon, SQLMap, Metasploit are the go-to tools?
What usually happens is that when you're scanning that many systems as a pen tester, that's a lot of systems to scan as a pen tester. Usually you're narrowing it down. But you're absolutely right. The automated tools that I will see used, believe it or not, I've seen Nmap. It's not automated necessarily. But I've seen the tools that you listed, I've seen used, but I've seen a lot of people will use scripts to automate Nmap scans, to slow the scan down, to then record that into a text file or like an HTML file or a CSV. And then I've seen them even import it into an Excel spreadsheet. And believe it or not, you use an Excel spreadsheet to basically create pivot tables and visualize a lot of those scans, by port, by vulnerability, by operating system. I've also seen artificial intelligence used more and more. There are applications that you can buy. They're not cheap, that have very good AI suggestions. They'll say, okay, I see where you're going with this. Have you considered that? And AI is there, and any automated tool is there to basically get rid of, most pen testers will talk about it this way, to eliminate the boring tasks so that you can focus on the real juicy stuff. So automation will quickly go, that's pretty basic stuff. That's not useful. Automation then will say, but out of those 1,000 systems, which is a lot of systems, here's 20 that look really interesting. And that way you can save a whole lot of time. Most people I know who manage pen testers, their biggest worry is they have a lot of pen testers. They'll spend hours on non-automated tasks. And they're really worried that, out of that 8-hour day or 10-hour or 12-hour day, they're only productive for about an hour of that. And automation can improve that. So,
cool. Thanks very much. We have one more question. So do you recommend any good books? First of all, any good books for pen testing? And then any good newsletters for pen testing?
Newsletters meaning good resources, things to go, places to go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's start with the pen testing books. There's so many good ones, there are quite a few good ones out there. And it depends, some people for pen testers are advanced. Some people just want to get into it. So I'll start with some beginning ones and things like that. There's the Pen Tester Blueprint. Wiley Crawley does a pretty good job with that. I think any of the O'Reilly titles, I really like O'Reilly's approach to understanding security, right? O'Reilly, the publishing group, right? I think they do a great job. There are, some of the old classic, like the O'Reilly Network Security Assessment, even though they'll talk about old stacks of technology, the moves are still there. When it comes to, groups, Kali.org, has good introductions, good ideas of introducing groups, but of getting you into groups. Another group that you could consider, the National Cybersecurity, NCL, for example, the National Cyber League. They're basically will organize you into cohorts and people who you can work together. You're given activities, and then you can go in and do hands-on kinds of activities there. The great reason I bring that up, it's all about the networking. And I really like the idea. A good pen tester networks with people, right? Gets to know people. By the way, get a hold of me at linkedin.com, James Stanger. You can find it, or Twitter for that matter, Twitter at James Stanger. I'm just saying those networking is really important so you can get to know people like that. Another book that I kind of like is The Pen Tester Blueprint, Starting the Career as an Ethical Hacker. There's that. That could work. So there's some pretty good resources out there, but the main thing, instead of news groups, things like that, which, there are a couple out there. Let me think about that. But I think the main thing is to network with individuals and local groups, things like that. Also, anything having to do with, I'm a big fan of Linux just in general because it's the attack surface, right? Almost everything is running on a Linux system, but also a lot of pen testers, you can use some great Windows stuff. But a lot of pen testing is done on a Linux system. So any good Linux book about pen testing.
That's really good advice. Thank you very much, James. Yeah, I liked a couple of things you said there. You have to know the network fundamentals. The Linux fundamentals are very important. Know the basics and how the networking works. Very important fundamentals for sure. And I liked that you pointed out the difference between pen testing and hacking is jail time. Now, I'm too pretty to go to jail, so I'm definitely stick with the pen testing. That's 100% sure. I'd also like to announce the winners of the CompTIA exam vouchers, so completely free exam vouchers, guys. Drum roll here. Who are the winners? We have 2 winners. All so right. Congratulations to Kenesha Wilson and to Thomas Delap. You have both won a free exam voucher. There was a question about recommendations. If you're starting off, guys, let's get the right way around. This is also a very manageable book, Linux Basics for Hackers. I would also recommend this book. It is only 200 pages, and that will get you in on your understanding Linux.
I was going to recommend that book by title, so good job. It's a great book. Yeah,
that's a really good book. Yeah, excellent. So congratulations, Kenesha. Congratulations, Thomas. We will be reaching out to you. We have your email addresses. I'd also like to remind everyone that we do still have some really great deals on training for all of our certification courses. But if you're looking for CompTIA certification soon, we have that 30% discount for everything. 30% off for all our courses, CompTIA courses, for anyone that attended this webinar today. It's only for the next 30 days, so it's until April 22nd. And if you'd like information on the 30% discount, just email info@secureninja.com, and they'll get you enrolled in the course and give you that 30% discount. Now, James, you mentioned that we could share those slides.
You bet.
Is that correct? So we'll go ahead and see if we can do that. If we don't get them posted correctly, you can also email info@secureninja.com, and we'll send you a copy of the slides as well if we can't get it into the chat soon enough. We'll try and do that. Let me see if I can do it.
Yeah, I've got it. Or you can share it however you want to. I don't know if I can get to the chat to the audience here. Let me see.
I can send the link that you sent me.
Yes, use that.
I will send it to everyone, so stand by, everyone. Okay, I have sent that out, so hopefully everybody gets that. Yep, there's a link there. It's a PowerPoint presentation. So guess what? We're going to know what version of PowerPoint you use, James. Some OSINT on you.
You do some OSINT on me. There you go.
And we'll see all your corrections as well. You should have done a PDF. Yeah, should have done the PDF.
Should have done a PDF. But then you know what version of Acrobat I'm using, although that's less than that.
Hey, we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes, and as I tell my students as well, we're watching slides and we're doing our coursework. Yeah. I'm constantly updating the slides. I'm constantly looking for what might it be that CompTIA is looking for you to know on your test, because I know CompTIA is very focused on knowing what the current threat actors are, the attack vectors are, so we want to stay bang up to date. So I'll occasionally have the spelling mistake in my slides, and some students, they hammer me for them. I'm just trying to give them the most up-to-date information. So, we try to make these things living documents. Excellent. Well, I think that's everything. So, James, again, thank you very much for giving up that hour of your time. I learned something. I learned a lot of stuff.
Good, cool. Well, every once in a while when I'm presenting, I learn a couple of things myself. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely, there's a couple of things that I'm like, yeah, it's a really good point. So it's been beneficial for all audiences. Thank you very much. And we'll hope to have you back on another presentation sometime soon. And I'll see you in Hawaii.
Right.
For everyone also watching, everyone watching Secure Ninja, we have Secure Ninja TV, our YouTube channel. We go to conferences and we talk to experts, and we talk to them about current topics and how their equipment, hardware, software systems work. So everyone who's watching this webinar should go to YouTube, go to Secure Ninja TV, and we're starting to do lots of videos at conferences, and we talk to the vendors, we talk to the people who matter, and we're going to give you the most up-to-date threats that are in the industry at the moment, the stuff you need to know about. So you'll see James, we interviewed him a couple of months ago at Westfest, and we're going to talk to him again in Hawaii in a few weeks. So James, it's been an absolute pleasure. We'll talk to you.
It's an honor to be working with you, man. Thank you.
All right. Talk to you again, James.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye then.